Okay. Welcome, guys. In this session, we shall be talking regarding heme. See, in the RBC, we have hemoglobin. If I divide this word, hemoglobin is made up of two molecules, heme and globin. Globin is basically the protein part. This is the protein part. We have two alpha chains as well as we have two beta chains. As a protein of hemoglobin, we have two alpha chain and two beta chains, so it is written as alpha 2 beta 2, means we have two alpha chains and two beta chain in the form of protein. And the heme is basically, it is a metalloporphyrin. It is a metalloporphyrin. Let's understand this word. What is the meaning of metalloporphyrin? Metalloporphyrin is made up of two molecules, metal and porphyrin, means heme is made up of two things. One is metal and second is porphyrin. The metal which is there in the heme, it is iron. Metal which is there in the heme, it is iron. It is in the +2 form. It is in the +2 form, so I can say it is in the ferrous form. What is porphyrin? Porphyrins are 4 pyrrole rings. 4 pyrrole rings structure. It is a special structure which is made up of 4 pyrrole rings. It is made up of 4 pyrrole rings. See, we have various type of porphyrin present in our body. I am just giving you a brief insight here. The various type of porphyrin that are present in our body, one I can say is uroporphyrin. Then we have coproporphyrin. And protoporphyrin. So these are the various type of porphyrin that are present in our body. But the porphyrin which is present in the hemoglobin, or I can say the heme part, it is the protoporphyrin. So I can say that if they ask in the heme which type of porphyrin is present, it is the protoporphyrin. So I can say that iron, or I can say the ferrous ion is the metal part and protoporphyrin is the porphyrin part. So if you club them together, the type of metalloporphyrin that you are going to get, it will be called as ferroprotoporphyrin. So I hope this composition of hemoglobin is clear. That hemoglobin, I'm just briefly revising, is made up of two molecules, heme and globin. Globin is the protein part. There are two alpha chains and two beta chains. When it comes to heme part, which is the primary topic of the today's session, it is basically a metalloporphyrin. It is a metalloporphyrin, means there will be two things, metal and a porphyrin. The metal which is there, it is the ferrous ion, and the porphyrin which is present, porphyrin means a 4 pyrrole ring made structure. The porphyrin which is present is protoporphyrin. So they will club together, this iron and this protoporphyrin will club together and will make a ferratoprotoporphyrin, that is the metalloporphyrin of the hemoglobin. Once we are clear with this fact, this heme is present not just in hemoglobin, it is present in various other proteins. So I can say that heme is present in hemoglobin, myoglobin, cytochrome C, So these are the few examples I have mentioned here, that heme is present not only in the hemoglobin, it is also present in myoglobin, it is also present in cytochrome C. Yes. Now, once we are clear with the fact that what is the meaning of heme is, we will see now the heme synthesis pathway. Heme synthesis pathway. If we talk about the place or the cell where the heme synthesis pathway will take place, heme synthesis pathway takes place in all the cells of body, all the cells of body except mature RBC. In the mature RBC, heme synthesis does not take place, and the reason for that is, if you see the organelle where the heme synthesis pathway takes place, is the pathway partly occurs in mitochondria and partly occurs in cytoplasm. So we know that mature RBC does not have mitochondria, so the heme synthesis pathway cannot take place in mature RBC. The reason for that is because there are some enzymes of heme synthesis pathway which are found in mitochondria. That is why it does not occur in mature RBC. Other than mature RBC, heme synthesis can occur in any cells of the body, any cell of the body. Starting with the heme synthesis pathway, coming to the first reaction. The first reaction is, see, it is a complicated pathway. We'll tell you a mnemonic also. Glycine, first of all, glycine unites with succinyl-CoA. When these two molecules unites, with the help of an enzyme, ALA synthase, and the coenzyme vitamin B6, with the help of ALA synthase and vitamin B6, these two small molecules will unite and will make a bigger molecule. The name of the bigger molecule is delta amino levulinic acid. Delta amino levulinic acid. I am adding the extra point here itself, that this enzyme ALA synthase is inhibited by a toxin, that is lead. Lead inhibits this enzyme ALA synthase. We also know that anti-tubercular drug, ATT, anti-tubercular drug, that is isoniazid also leads to decrease in vitamin B6, so I can say it will also inhibit this reaction. Isoniazid will also inhibit this reaction, as well as lead also leads to inhibition of ALA synthase. There is one more inhibitor that we can add to this particular enzyme, that is glucose. Glucose also inhibits this reaction of ALA synthase. So there are three inhibitors that I have highlighted, that ALA synthase is inhibited by lead, isoniazid, which is a ATT, and glucose. These are the three molecules which can inhibit this enzyme ALA synthase. This particular reaction occurs in mitochondria. As I told you that heme synthesis pathway partly occurs in mitochondria, partly occurs in the cytoplasm. So this first reaction occurs in mitochondria. Then this amino levulinic acid, or I can say delta amino levulinic acid, will come in the cytoplasm. So I am saying, let's say these delta amino levulinic acid will come in the cytoplasm. Once they comes in the cytoplasm, two molecules of delta amino levulinic acid will unite, and what we do is we take out the water which is there in the amino levulinic acid. If you take out the water from the amino levulinic acid, the name of the enzyme will be ALA dehydratase, because we are taking the water, so it is called as dehydratase, amino levulinic acid ALA dehydratase. Why we are writing ALA dehydratase? Because it is the full form of aminolevulinic acid, ALA dehydratase. When you take out the water, the molecule that we are going to get, it is called as prophylinogen. It is called as prophylinogen. Which is, in short, it is written as PBG. Then this prophylinogen, from the prophylinogen, we will take 4 molecules of prophylinogen and we will try to unite them. When they are trying to unite, ammonia is taken out from prophylinogen. Because we are taking out the ammonia, so the name of the enzyme is PBG deaminase, because we are taking out the ammonia, PBG deaminase. When you take out the ammonia from prophylinogen, the molecule that we are going to get, it is called as hydroxymethylbilane. This hydroxymethylbilane is also called as uroporphyrinogen 1. It is also called as uroporphyrinogen 1. The name of the enzyme which I have told you, it is the PBG deaminase, because we are taking out the ammonia from the porphyrinogen. At the same time we are also synthesizing HMB, which is also called as uroporphyrinogen 1. So the name of the enzyme uroporphyrinogen deaminase, it is also called as HMB synthase. It is also called as HMB synthase because we are synthesizing HMB synthase or PBG deaminase is same. Even they have given one more name to this enzyme, because this HMB is also called as uroporphyrinogen 1. So this enzyme is also called as uroporphyrinogen 1 synthase. Uroporphyrinogen 1 synthase. Now once this reaction is completed, this uroporphyrinogen, or I can say hydroxymethylbilane will convert into the next intermediate, that is written as uroporphyrinogen 3. Because we are synthesizing uroporphyrinogen 3, so the name of enzyme is uroporphyrinogen, UPG, uroporphyrinogen 3 synthase. The name of the enzyme is uroporphyrinogen 3 synthase, because we are synthesizing UPG3. Once the uroporphyrinogen is synthesized, then from uroporphyrinogen, the next intermediate is synthesized, that is called as coproporphyrinogen. Coproporphyrinogen 3. Coproporphyrinogen 3. When uroporphyrinogen converts into coproporphyrinogen, in this reaction, one carbon dioxide is out, because we are taking out the carbon dioxide. So the name of enzyme is UPG3 decarboxylase. Till this point, the reactions were occurring in the cytoplasm. As I told you, the pathway we started in the mitochondria. Then we came to cytoplasm. So all these reactions which we have discussed till now, it was occurring in the cytoplasm. Now again, this coproporphyrinogen 3 will enter in the mitochondria. In the mitochondria, there is an enzyme that is called as coproporphyrinogen 3 oxidase, or I can say coproporphyrinogen oxidase. It will generate a molecule that is called as protoporphyrinogen. Then this protoporphyrinogen will again undergo oxidation. So the name of enzyme is protoporphyrinogen porphyrinogen oxidase, and we get a molecule that is called as protoporphyrin. On this protoporphyrin, the last molecule is added, that is ferrous ion. When the ferrous ion is added, the name of the enzyme is ferrochelatase, and what we get is ferretoprotoporphyrin. Ferretoprotoporphyrin, which is also called as heme. In the beginning I told you heme is a metalloporphyrin. Which metalloporphyrin? It is a ferretoprotoporphyrin. So this is what we wanted to synthesize. I know there are many tongue twisting names which are there in this pathway. Now let's see how we can remember this pathway. What is the mnemonic that can be used? See, it's up to you whether you want to use the mnemonic or you want to remember as it is. The reason you have to remember this pathway, because there are many disorders which are associated with this pathway. There are certain enzyme deficiency which lead to certain disorders, and that we are going to discuss. Before going to that, I want you to remember this pathway, at least the intermediate of these pathways. So the mnemonic is see, I can say that there are some great doctors. There are some great doctors who loves what are the great doctors loves nowadays. One, the first thing that they love is, nowadays I can say, they love PUBG. They love what? They love PUBG. Then what they love is, they love heavy muscle bulk. What they love is, see, first, what some great doctors, I will tell you how to use this mnemonic. Just first try to understand a simple fact. There are some great doctors loves what? They loves PUBG. There are certain things they love. The first thing they love is PUBG. Then the second thing they love is heavy muscle bulk. They like heavy muscle bulk. Then what they like? They like your PG. They like your PG, means your PG also. Then what else they like? They also like your co-PG. Then what else they like? They like pre-PG. Then what they like is pre-PG. See, what I am saying is, there are some great doctors which loves 5 things: PUBG, heavy muscle bulk, your PG, co-PG and pre-PG. Your PG, co-PG and pre-PG. Let's see how this mnemonic sets up in this pathway. I told you some great doctors, some great doctors, D for doctors, delta, loves. See here, till now what I am saying is, some, I am highlighting with, let's say, with the yellow color, some great doctors, delta is doctor, loves what they love? They love PUBG. What else they love? They love heavy muscle bulk. Then what they love? They love your PG. Then what they love? They love your co-PG. After that, what they love? They love the pre-PG. They love the pre-PG, protoporphyrinogen and protoporphyrin. Yes. So this is one of the mnemonic that you can use. There are various other ways as well by which you can remember. Some great doctors, I am again repeating this. Some great doctors love PUBG, heavy muscle bulk, your PG, co-PG as well as the pre-PG. Your PG, co-PG, pre-PG. Why it is important to remember this entire pathway in this particular sequence? The reason for that is there are various disorders that occurs due to deficiency of particular enzymes. So I will write down that particular information in this pathway, starting with this enzyme. See, ALA synthase, I have told you that it is inhibited. I will just remove this yellow color one. Okay, so see here. What I am saying is there are certain disorders that are associated with some enzyme deficiency. The most important is this one, uroporphyrinogen 1 synthase, which is also called as profobilinogen deaminase, which is also called as HMB synthase. All are same. The deficiency of these enzymes, if there is deficiency of these enzymes, this condition, it is called as acute intermittent porphyria. This condition is referred as acute intermittent porphyria. This is the most important question that they can ask from this particular pathway specifics, that acute intermittent porphyria is due to which enzyme deficiency. They will give one of the name of the enzyme. Either they will give uroporphyrinogen 1 synthase, or they will give PBG deaminase, or they will give HMB synthase. You have to select one, whichever is given in your choice. Then the second is this enzyme UPG 3D carboxylase. If there is deficiency of this enzyme, this condition, it is called as porphyria cutanea tarda. This condition is called as porphyria cutanea tarda. Then the next is, if there is deficiency of this enzyme, if there is deficiency of protoporphyrinogen oxidase, this condition is called as varigate porphyria. This last enzyme, furochelatase, if there is deficiency of this enzyme, this condition, it is called as erythropoietic protoporphyria. This condition is referred as erythropoietic protoporphyria. This furochelatase enzyme, which is the last enzyme, it is also inhibited by one more molecule. It can be inhibited by lead. Lead can inhibit the first enzyme as well as the last enzyme of the heme synthesis pathway. So I have highlighted only 4 porphyrias, starting with the acute intermittent porphyria, which is the most common porphyria. Then second is porphyria cutanea tarda, most common porphyria in the clinical setup that you will find. Overall it is not the most common one, but the one which comes to you in the clinical practice is the acute intermittent porphyria. If they ask that which is the overall most common, it is the porphyria cutanea tarda. It is a subclinical condition most of the time, so it is the most common porphyria. We will write down this information separately as well. This is the most common porphyria overall. Then the varigate porphyria and the erythropoietic protoporphyria. These are the 4 porphyrias that you should know at least. Once we are clear with this pathway, I want to highlight 2-3 facts that how they can give you a clinical scenario and can ask you a question. If there is accumulation of ALA, aminolevulinic acid, or if there is accumulation of this molecule ALA or PBG or PBG, if there is accumulation of any of these two molecules, then it will produce the neuropsychiatric symptom. It will produce the neuropsychiatric symptom. Means if you see all the porphyria which I have made, acute intermittent porphyria, porphyria cutaneous tarda, or variegate porphyria, any porphyria, means what is happening is, after, let's say, if we talk about acute intermittent porphyria, means this reaction is not taking place. If this reaction is not taking place, means the porphobilinogen and aminolevulinic acid will increase. And once, if these two molecules increase in any circumstances, then they will lead to neuropsychiatric symptoms. Yes. So this is what I want to explain you, that if there is increase in the aminolevulinic acid and porphobilinogen produces neuropsychiatric symptoms. Whereas accumulation of porphyrins leads to cutaneous symptoms such as photosensitivity. Neuropsychiatric symptom is due to presence of ALA or PBG. If there is accumulation of porphyrin, for example, let's say if I say you that let's talk about erythropoietic porphyria. If this reaction is not taking place, means this molecule will accumulate, and this molecule is a protoporphyrin. This is a porphyrin. So it will lead to photosensitivity. So by looking at the symptom, we can make a differential that whether we are talking about the beginning ones, means the acute intermittent porphyria, or we are talking about these erythropoietic porphyria or the variegate porphyria, where the porphyrins get accumulated. Then once these symptoms are done, once we are done with the symptoms, I can say that the majority of the porphyria, they are autosomal dominant. I'm writing this fact here is most of the porphyria are autosomal dominant, except, we just have to remember this exception. We should know that which are the autosomal recessive ones and which are the X-linked one. The autosomal recessive porphyria are erythropoietic protoporphyria, and congenital erythropoietic protoporphyria. The X-linked recessive porphyria is X-linked protoporphyria. So the name itself is very clear. It's saying X-linked. So the only thing that you have to remember is which are the autosomal recessive porphyria we have. There are two: erythropoietic protoporphyria and congenital erythropoietic protoporphyria. These are the autosomal recessive one. Rest all of the porphyrias are autosomal dominant. See, in this pathway I have not mentioned, I am again saying, in this pathway I have not mentioned all the porphyrias. I have not mentioned congenital erythropoietic porphyria. I have not mentioned X-linked protoporphyria. Why I have not mentioned? The reason is very simple, because I want to keep it simple, that what is the important information that you should draw. So these are the porphyrias that I want to make you remember, that which enzyme deficiency leads to these porphyria. That is why I have highlighted. Apart from this, there are other porphyrias as well. But to keep it simple, I have not discussed those. So all the porphyrias are autosomal dominant, except erythropoietic protoporphyria, congenital erythropoietic protoporphyria, which is a autosomal recessive disorder. If we see that which is the most common porphyria overall, the most common porphyria is porphyria cutaneous tarda. porphyria, cutánea, terda. But if they say which is the most common acute porphyria, I have earlier also mentioned that the porphyria which is most commonly found in the clinical setup will be the acute porphyria, will have the acute symptom, will have the acute emergency, and that is acute intermittent porphyria. If they ask which is the most common porphyria in the pediatric age group, most common porphyria in children in the pediatric age group, then the answer will be erythropoietic protoporphyria. Erythropoietic protoporphyria. Once you will make a practice, once you will write down this entire information by yourself, you will be familiar with the terms. It is looking bit more complicated, but it is not that much complicated. Once you will write down these information with your own hand, then you will be able to remember. See, most of the intermediate you can remember by this mnemonic, and the four porphyrias I have highlighted, you have to remember those porphyria with the name, and the remaining information I have written in these boxes. Once we are done with these porphyrias, this was the heme synthesis pathway. Now I want to add one more topic here, that is heme catabolism. How the heme is destroyed, how the heme is digested. Heme catabolism. See, we know that RBC, when the RBC destruction will occur, when the RBC will be destructed, or I can say the RBC will rupture, what will come out is the hemoglobin. If I ask you that in a single day, how many RBC normally are getting destructed in your spleen, liver and bone marrow, then it will be somewhat around 200 billions of RBC are destructed every day, and that will lead to formation of 6 gram of hemoglobin. The 6 gram of hemoglobin will come into circulation. 6 gram of hemoglobin. As far as the RBC destructions are concerned, you are a multi-billionaire. 200 billions of RBC is getting destructed every day. Means 6 gram of hemoglobin is getting free from the RBC. 1 gram of hemoglobin can produce, let's say, up to around somewhat 35 milligram of bilirubin. 35 milligram of bilirubin, because we are generating 6 gram of, we are making 6 gram of hemoglobin free every day. We are getting free 6 gram of hemoglobin by the destruction of RBC. So I can say daily you are producing around 200 to 300 milligram of bilirubin. Bilirubin is produced, because 1 gram produces 35 milligram. So we have 6 grams of free hemoglobin. So I can say it will generate around 200 to 300 milligram of bilirubin every day. So this was the mathematical aspect. Let's see the reaction part, how these hemoglobin will convert into bilirubin. So what happens is, when the RBC gets destructed, when the RBC destruction occurs due to any reason, maybe because of the age of the RBC, maybe because of some other factors. Yes, the age of the RBC lifespan is around 120 days. After that it will get destructed, and it gets destructed mainly in the spleen, or we can say bone marrow, sometimes in the liver as well. So mainly it is in the spleen. Let's keep it simple. Mainly the RBC destruction occurs in spleen. So when the RBC will be destructed, what will come out is the hemoglobin. Hemoglobin will be separated into two molecules, heme and globin. We all know that globin is a protein molecule. So this globin will be converted into amino acids, will be disrupted into amino acids, and amino acid will be reused. amino acid will be reused. Whereas heme is a metalloporphyrin. Because we have discussed heme in detail, I have told you that instead of metalloporphyrin we can use a better term, that is, instead of metal we can write which metal is there. It is the iron, so I can say it is ferro. Which porphyrin is there? It is protoporphyrin, so I can say ferro protoporphyrin. What is heme? Heme is a ferro protoporphyrin. So if you will destruct this ferro protoporphyrin, you will separate two molecules. One will be the ferrous ion and another will be protoporphyrin. This iron molecule will be reused. It will be reused. Now we will focus on this molecule, protoporphyrin. This protoporphyrin with the help of enzyme heme oxidase, it will be converted into a molecule that is called as biliverdin. This biliverdin will undergo reduction. So the name of enzyme will be biliverdin reductase. And once it will go undergo reduction, the molecule that you are going to get, it will be called as bilirubin. This bilirubin is also referred as unconjugated bilirubin. It is also referred as unconjugated bilirubin. Unconjugated bilirubin is also called as indirect bilirubin. I told you that the destruction of RBC was mainly occurring in the spleen. So I can say all these molecules or all these reactions were occurring in the spleen. So I can say the bilirubin was generated there. The bilirubin was generated in the endoplasmic reticulum of the spleen. Now this bilirubin, or I can say the conjugated bilirubin, needs to be transported to the liver to make it conjugated, because it is unconjugated. What we need to do is we need to conjugate it. So this bilirubin will be transported to liver via blood. How we are going to transport? If they ask what is the name of the transporter, who will help in the transport of bilirubin, it is transported via blood with the help of albumin. Albumin is a protein which is found in blood, and that will help in the transport of bilirubin. Bilirubin and albumin will make a complex and will be transported. Once they will reach at the liver, let's say this demarcation is showing you, this gray color is the liver. Liver will uptake these bilirubin molecules. So I can say there will be a uptake of unconjugated bilirubin. Unconjugated bilirubin will be uptaken by the liver. What we need to do is we need to conjugate, because it's an unconjugated bilirubin. The word unconjugated here means that it is a water insoluble. Unconjugated means water insoluble. What we need to do is we need to make it water soluble. So this unconjugated bilirubin, to make it water soluble, what we do is we need to add some molecule. Onto this. What we add here is to make it conjugated, we add the acidic amino acid, that is glucuronic acid. We add glucuronic acid molecule to unconjugated bilirubin, so that it converts into conjugated bilirubin. conjugated bilirubin is also referred as direct bilirubin. Direct bilirubin, it is water soluble. Now, to add glucuronic acid, to conjugate glucuronic acid on the bilirubin molecule, we require enzyme. The name of the enzyme which is required to add glucuronic acid to the unconjugated bilirubin, the name of the enzyme is UDP, glucuronyl transferase. With the help of this enzyme, the conjugation process will take place. Now, once the conjugated bilirubin is made, now it is ready to go into your GI tract. So this will be excreted from the liver. Yes, or I can say this will be secreted from liver. When this conjugated bilirubin is secreted in your the biliary ducts, it will be secreted in your biliary ducts. We require a special gene, a special transporter that is called as MRP2. So I can say the direct bilirubin or the conjugated bilirubin is secreted from liver via MRP2. What is the meaning of MRP2? Is MRP2 stand for multi-drug resistant protein. Multi-drug resistant protein 2. With the help of this molecule, the direct bilirubin or the conjugated bilirubin molecules will be secreted in your biliary system, and this conjugated bilirubin will reach in your intestine. Once the conjugated bilirubin will come into intestine, it will help in the digestion of the various type of lipids. And the digestion, when the digestion part is completed, when the function of conjugated bilirubin is completed, and it will reach in terminal ileum. In the terminal ileum, there are the commensal flora, or I can say the commensal bacteria. What this commensal bacteria will do is, the commensal bacteria will convert this unconjugated bilirubin, will convert this conjugated bilirubin into urobilinogen. Now, what happens with the urobilinogen is that majority, means 80-90% of urobilinogen will convert into something called as stercobilinogen. Or I can say stercobilin will convert into stercobilinogen and this molecule will come in your stool. So I can say that the majority of urobilinogen is excreted via stool in the form of stercobilin and stercobilinogen. Around 10 to 20% will be absorbed back and sent to liver via enterohepatic circulation. Means what? That around 10 to 20% of urobilinogen will be absorbed and will be sent back to the liver with the help of enterohepatic circulation. And less than 1% of your urobilinogen will come in the urine, or I can say will be excreted via urine. That is why the urine have the pale yellow color. The reason of the pale yellow color is the presence of urobilinogen is there. Now, once we are clear with this, the heme catabolism pathway, I would like to add a clinical site, that is hyperbilirubinemia. Hyperbilirubinemia means there is increased amount of bilirubin in the blood. There is increased amount of bilirubin in the blood is referred as hyperbilirubinemia. Hyperbilirubinemia can be divided into, if they ask what are the causes of hyperbilirubinemia, we can divide into two main category. One is called as congenital hyperbilirubinemias and acquired. Let's first talk about congenital hyperbilirubinemia. There are certain causes in the congenital category that leads to unconjugated hyperbilirubinemia. Unconjugated hyperbilirubinemia. Whereas there are certain causes in the congenital variety that leads to conjugated hyperbilirubinemia. So we should know which are the causes that leads to unconjugated hyperbilirubinemia and which leads to conjugated hyperbilirubinemia. To understand this, I will scroll up and I want to focus you here. See, in the liver, what was happening that, now follow the yellow color marker. Unconjugated bilirubin was converted into conjugated bilirubin. So what I can say is, if in the liver the uptake of the unconjugated bilirubin is not proper, or if there is deficiency of this enzyme UDP glucuronil transferase, if these two processes are not working properly, either the uptake of the unconjugated bilirubin or this enzyme is not there, then this reaction will not take place. If this reaction will not take place, then the unconjugated bilirubin will increase. So there are two conditions where these things happen. The condition where I am adding here only, the condition where the uptake is defective, this condition, it is referred as Gilbert syndrome. So I can say that the Gilbert syndrome, because the uptake is defective, so the unconjugated will not be converted into conjugated. That will lead to unconjugated hyperbilirubinemia. And if this UDP glucuronil transferase enzyme is absent, then this condition is referred as Crigler-Najjar syndrome. So I have explained you two reasons of unconjugated hyperbilirubinemia. If the uptake is not occurring properly, if the liver is unable to take up the unconjugated bilirubin, this condition is called as Gilbert syndrome. If this enzyme of conjugation is not there, then this condition is called as Crigler-Najjar syndrome. Let's write down this here. The causes of unconjugated hyperbilirubinemia. The first cause that you should know is Gilbert syndrome. And what is Gilbert syndrome is uptake of unconjugated bilirubin is defective. And the second condition is Crigler-Najjar syndrome. Crigler-Najjar syndrome. What is happening in the Crigler-Najjar syndrome is there is deficiency of UDP glucuronil transferase. There is deficiency of this enzyme UDP glucuronil transferase, so the conjugation cannot occur and there is increased amount of unconjugated hyperbilirubinemia. See, this Gilbert syndrome, the treatment of this Gilbert syndrome is we use phenobarbital. So this unconjugated hyperbilirubinemia, Gilbert syndrome, because it is responsive to phenobarbital, so it is phenobarbital responsive unconjugated hyperbilirubinemia, whereas Crigler-Najjar does not respond that much very well to phenobarbital. Gilbert will completely resolve with phenobarbital, but the Crigler-Najjar will not resolve. So this is how we can differentiate. You just give a trial of phenobarbital because it is going to help in both the condition, but Gilbert will completely resolve. So when you are having unconjugated hyperbilirubinemia congenitally, you use phenobarbital. If it is completely resolved, it is Gilbert. If it is not, it is partially resolved, it will be called as Crigler-Najjar syndrome. Now coming to the conjugated hyperbilirubinemia. Again, there are two conditions. That are associated with conjugated hyperbilirubinemia. The first is called as Dublin-Johnson syndrome. And the second one is called as Rotor syndrome and Dublin-Johnson syndrome. So what is Dublin-Johnson syndrome and what is Rotor syndrome? In both the condition there is increased amount of conjugated bilirubin in the blood. So I will again scroll up to the same diagram. See, I have highlighted that if the conjugation has occurred, if the conjugation is occurred, after that this conjugated bilirubin was supposed to be secreted by the liver, and for secretion we require a molecule which is called as MRP2. If this MRP2 is defective, it leads to Dublin-Johnson syndrome. If there is defect in the MRP2, it will lead to Dublin-Johnson syndrome. If there is any other cause which is leading to defect in the secretion other than MRP2, that will be called as Rotor syndrome. Yes, see, in the secretion we require multiple factors. The most important is MRP2. If the MRP2 is not working, we will say it is Dublin-Johnson syndrome. If due to any other than MRP2 leading to conjugated hyperbilirubinemia, then it will be called as Rotor syndrome. So I can say that Dublin-Johnson syndrome, it is due to mutation in MRP2 gene. In this Dublin-Johnson syndrome, the liver turns jet black. In Dublin-Johnson syndrome, the liver turns jet black, so it is also called as a black liver jaundice. The prognosis is not good. What is Rotor syndrome? It is due to defect in excretion, or I can say defect in secretion of conjugated bilirubin from liver. So the important is this question, that Dublin-Johnson syndrome is due to mutation in which gene? It is due to mutation in the multi-drug resistant protein, that is MRP2 gene. So these are the causes of conjugated and unconjugated hyperbilirubinemia. These are the four syndromes: Gilbert, Crigler-Najjar, Dublin-Johnson and Rotor syndrome. Coming to the acquired causes of hyperbilirubinemia, means what are the acquired causes of jaundice? Hyperbilirubinemia means jaundice. So which are the acquired causes that can lead to jaundice? So these causes are divided into three categories. The first category, it is called as hemolytic jaundice or hemolytic hyperbilirubinemia. The second category, it is called as hepatic, and the third, it is called as obstructive. There are three conditions in the acquired that can lead to jaundice. It can be a hemolytic cause, can be a hepatic cause, can be obstructive cause. The example of hemolytic anemia, for example, let's say if someone is suffering from G6PD deficiency anemia, means there are increased chances of hemolysis. So whenever there will be increased amount of hemolysis because of this, there is deficiency of G6PD. So this condition can lead to a hemolytic hyperbilirubinemia because there will be leading to hemolysis. Hepatic, I can add a cause hepatic. For example, let's say alcoholic hepatitis. In alcoholic hepatitis, the liver is not working properly. There is inflammation in the hepatocytes, and that can produce a obstruction. From the liver. So that is called as alcoholic hepatitis, and that can lead to hyperbilirubinemia. The obstructive jaundice, the example I can say is very much straightforward. That can be a CBD stone, a gallbladder stone, CBD stone, or I can say periampullary carcinoma. Periampullary carcinoma that will lead to a physical obstruction, so that the bile will not be excreted, or the same way the bilirubin will not be excreted. So these are the three categories on which the causes can be classified in the acquired category: hemolytic, hepatic, and obstructive. Hemolytic, hepatic, and obstructive. Now once we are clear with these facts, I would like to add some additional information. The first additional information that I would like to add, it is regarding HbA1c. See, what is HbA1c is? It is also referred as glycated hemoglobin. Now what happens is, the hemoglobin which is present in the plasma, it can unite with glucose. And this process is called as a glycation. Once the glucose will unite and the glycation process will occur, it will produce glycated hemoglobin. The reason why I am explaining here is because that this glucose molecule can attach on various different site of hemoglobin. But 80% of the time it will attach on the same site. The place where this glucose is going to attach, it is the N terminal of beta chain, where the valine amino acid is present. So what I want to say you is, this glucose molecule can attach to various different sites of hemoglobin, but majority of the time, for the 80% of the time, it will attach on the valine amino acid, which is the last amino acid on the beta chain. And when it will attach on this, then this molecule is referred as HbA1c. If the glucose does not attach to here and it attaches to somewhere else, then it will produce some other molecules such as HbA1b, HbA1a. We have various molecules. Now we always talk about HbA1c. The reason for that is, what they ask is, in the HbA1c, the glucose molecule or the glycation process occurs which part of the hemoglobin? It will attach on the last or the terminal part of the beta chain where the valine amino acid is present. The glucose will attach there, and this is referred as HbA1c. This entire reaction where the glucose is attached on the valine amino acid or the last amino acid on the beta chain, this reaction is called as Maillard reaction. The normal HbA1c level, it is less than 5.5. What the HbA1c provides us the average glucose level of 8 to 12 weeks. HbA1c denotes average blood glucose of 8 to 12 weeks. It gives the average estimation of blood glucose for last 8 to 12 weeks. What was the average blood glucose? This is provided with the help of HbA1c, because the lifespan of the RBC is around 8 to 10 weeks, 8 to 12 weeks. So it will give the same estimation. This was the details regarding HbA1c I want to share with you. Then I want to share the information regarding a molecule, that is myoglobin. In the beginning, I told you that heme is not only present in hemoglobin, it is also present in myoglobin. So what is the meaning of myoglobin? Myoglobin is basically what it will do is, it helps in storage of oxygen in skeletal muscle. See, myoglobin is a molecule which help in the storage of oxygen in muscle. What the hemoglobin do is, hemoglobin helps in the transfer of oxygen. Myoglobin helps in the storage of oxygen in the skeletal muscle. One molecule of myoglobin binds with one molecule of oxygen. it has very high affinity. It has very high affinity. Myoglobin has a very high affinity towards oxygen. Towards oxygen means what? If you see the oxygen dissociation curve, oxygen dissociation curve, oxygen dissociation curve of myoglobin and oxygen, myoglobin oxygen dissociation curve. You will see it is having a shape of hyperbola, hyperbolic. The shape of the graph is hyperbolic. The myoglobin oxygen dissociation curve, the shape is hyperbolic. You may have learned this in the physiology. There are two dissociation curves that we should know: hemoglobin oxygen dissociation curve and myoglobin oxygen dissociation curve. The myoglobin oxygen dissociation curve, the shape is hyperbolic. Shape is hyperbolic. If we compare this data with hemoglobin, if we compare this data with hemoglobin, what it will do is, the function of hemoglobin is basically transport of oxygen. Transport of oxygen. Myoglobin is the storage. Myoglobin is for the storage of oxygen in the muscle, whereas hemoglobin is for the transport of oxygen. Now, how the transport occurs? How the transport occurs? See, if I divide your body in two parts, one is your lungs, and second is the peripheral tissue. Second is the peripheral tissue. In the lung, the hemoglobin will combine with oxygen, and will convert into oxygenated hemoglobin. And why this oxygen is able to add with the hemoglobin? The reason is, in the lung there is increase in the pH. The pH of the lung is comparatively high. If you compare with the peripheral tissue, it is more acidic. The peripheral tissue is more acidic, so there is less pH. Whereas in the lung, the pH is high, so the oxygen is able to attach with the hemoglobin. And this effect in the physiology books, it is written as Haldane effect. It's referred as Haldane effect. So what is Haldane effect? Is the oxygen is able to attach with the hemoglobin in the lung because of increase in the pH. Now this oxygenated hemoglobin via blood will reach to the peripheral tissue. Oxygenated hemoglobin will reach there, but in the peripheral tissue the pH is less. So what it will do is, it will deliver the oxygen, and once the oxygen is delivered, I can say the deoxygenated hemoglobin will remain. So you have got the oxygen here because of the decreased pH. This unloading of the oxygen because of decreased pH in the peripheral tissue, this is in the physiology book referred as Bohr effect. The process of loading and unloading, also depend on one more molecule that is referred as 2,3-BPG, or some book says 2,3-DPG. It's the same thing. BPG stands for biphosphoglycerate, or DPG is diphosphoglycerate. Diphosphoglyceraldehyde is the same thing. Biphosphoglyceraldehyde or diphosphoglyceraldehyde is the same thing. Now this molecule helps in the loading and the unloading of the oxygen. How it will help? See, when the RBC undergoes glycolysis, because RBC does not have mitochondria, so the glycolysis that is going to occur is anaerobic one. But sometime this glycolysis will enter into something called as Rappaport-Lebring pathway. This glycolysis will enter into another shunt pathway that is called as Rappaport-Lebring pathway. If the RBC where the glycolysis was taking place, it enters in Rappaport-Lebring pathway, then the product that you are going to get, it is the 2,3-BPG. Now what this 2,3-BPG will lead to is, this 2,3-BPG, it decreases the oxygen affinity, of hemoglobin. Means hemoglobin, or I can say in the easy words, I can say the the bond between the hemoglobin and oxygen will be weaker if there is more 2,3 BPG. So the bond will be weaker, so the oxygen can unload easily. So I can say this is the molecule which stimulates the unloading of the oxygen from the hemoglobin. Or see here, I can say that on the hemoglobin there is one particular site, there is only one site on hemoglobin where this 2,3 BPG molecule can attach. If this 2,3 BPG molecule attaches on that particular site of hemoglobin, there will be decreased affinity to oxygen. So if the oxygen affinity is decreased, I can say there will be increase in the delivery of oxygen. So this 2,3 BPG is the molecule which leads to unloading of the oxygen from the RBC. If you want to depict the same thing on the graph, this will be called as oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. The shape of this curve is sigmoid. It has the sigmoid shape or the S shape. In the myoglobin, I told you the shape is hyperbolic. Here it is sigmoid. On the x-axis, what I am writing is the partial pressure of oxygen, whereas on the y-axis we are writing oxygenated hemoglobin. As you increase the partial pressure of oxygen, there will be increase in oxygenated hemoglobin to a certain level. Now, this graph can shift towards the right side or can shift towards the left side. If the graph shifts towards the right side, the molecule which leads to shifting of the curve towards the right side means there is reduced affinity of oxygen. There will be reduced affinity of oxygen, means if there is reduced affinity means the unloading will occur. So what they ask is which molecules promotes the right shift, of the curve. The right shift is promoted with the help of increased amount of 2,3 BPG. The more the 2,3 BPG will be there, the more the unloading will occur, and the more the unloading, the curve will shift towards the right side. On the other side, the curve can shift towards the left side. If you want to shift curve towards the left side means there is increase in affinity to oxygen for hemoglobin. The increase in affinity can occur in only one condition, means there is decrease in 2,3 BPG. If you decrease the amount of 2,3 BPG, then there will be increase in affinity, so the curve will shift towards the left side. Left shift. So this green color is representing the left shift, whereas the blue color is representing the right shift. See, if you have understood the entire concept, fine. If not, just remember a single fact that we have derived from this information, that increased amount of 2,3 BPG leads to right shift, whereas decreased amount of 2,3 BPG leads to increase in affinity, and which is represented with the left shift. So let's I will summarize this data here. I am saying that the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve can have two shifts. Either it can be a right shift or it can be a left shift. So what they ask is which factors will lead to right shift. I can say the right shift will be with the help of increased amount of 2,3 BPG, or I can say increased amount of hydrogen ion, or I can say increased amount of temperature, increased amount of altitude. These are the various factors that increases the delivery of the oxygen, whereas the left shift occurs with the decreased amount of 2,3 BPG. So this data is important from the physiology part, that which factors will lead to right shift, which factors will lead to left shift, and which factors will lead to right shift. Thank you.